Yeah, well, thank you all so much for coming out tonight. I'm Kait Boyle. I also go by Caitlin in many worlds. I've titled this event, You Are Unlimited, and hopefully the next hour-ish will show why. And this is basically my story in the last year, and it is a fundraiser for the Karen Project, which is an organization that uses women's outdoor adventures to fundraise to make grants for other programs that increase outdoor opportunities and access for young women and girls in the outdoors. And so their grants go to organizations such as Little Bellas, Embark, Women's Wilderness, Big City Mountaineers, and a number of small startup organizations that are doing things like getting girls in after-school mountain bike programs, getting girls in New York City out climbing, taking refugee girls and women into the outdoors in Salt Lake City, and I believe in they're working on partnering with a group that's getting migrant girls outside as well. So, as you'll see, it's not, my story extends beyond the bicycle, although it's largely inspired by the bike, and share more about my adventure fundraiser a little bit later. But tonight I'm going to talk, I'll introduce myself a little bit more so that you have a context of where the story is coming from, and then I'll tell you about this year leading up to this 84 Days Outside fundraiser. And that will be the story, and I've put together some slides to hopefully add to the visual inspiration. A couple things just to note and offer as a disclaimer. One, I'm getting over a cold, and so if I either sound stuffed or sneeze that sounds like a hack, then I apologize deeply. And second, this is also a very, I got to share this story on Thursday in Prescott, where I spent a lot of the most recent years of my life. And it is a very personal and vulnerable story, and so if you see maybe some tears or emotion, please just understand that that's part of it for me, and I think that it's actually part of the process. And finally, thank you so much. I'll take the role. And finally, I just really want to extend my thanks to Josh and the whole Campfire Cycling crew for having me here and us all coming together, both for the space for me to be able to talk about this and also for the Karen Project. And I really hope that you all, if you haven't been here before, like myself, this is my first day coming into this space, are able to be impressed and inspired by all the ways that we can get our kids together and go camp with our bikes.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Yep. All right. I'm Kait. So who I am today has been shaped by moving and breathing outside. I started mountain biking and just biking in general when I was 24, so 8 years ago, and I started racing bikes 5 years ago. And so while that has taken over my life in that time, the outdoors has been a huge part of my story long before then, mostly through outdoor education and through working for Outward Bound and Knowles, and then getting a degree in wilderness leadership at Prescott College, and then becoming associate faculty in adventure education at Prescott College, spending days and days and weeks and months in the field outside, rafting and hiking and climbing and backcountry skiing, and then biking, is really the background that has informed how I race my bike and also what I'm trying to do now. And so, starting into the last year. This was exactly 1 year ago on last Thursday. I looked in December 7th, apparently. I didn't have any pictures. But this was 1 year ago, and it's up in the Tetons in Idaho, where I now call home for the first time in this last year. And I felt like I was at the top of the world. One, skiing great snow, but two, the year had been pretty incredible for me as far as a big transition in career and finding great success in it. just a month and a half before that, I had won the 24-hour World Championships in Scotland. And that race was pretty incredible experience in itself because it rained for 24 hours. It started raining specifically when I got on my bike to warm up a half an hour before the race, and it stopped raining a half an hour after I got off my bike at the end of the race. It downpoured. It actually rained so much that we could visually see the creeks rising through the 24 hours. And I mean, we were racing on the side of Ben Nevis in the Scottish Highlands. And so, while I had done everything I could to prepare as best as I could physically for this race, and I had plenty of tactical experience and had the right headspace and everything, really, racing in such shitty conditions for 24 hours, I think that the success of that came from all those years of working in the field with students. And when we would climb above tree line and there was just rain blowing sideways, if I found my headspace slipping into a place of thinking, oh wow, this is hard, or I wish I wasn't doing this, I'd immediately bring myself back to, actually, I'm so lucky because I only have to take care of myself right now, and not even that much. I just have to ride a lap, and then I have my mom and my coach to give me food. And it's way easier than having 11 wet and grumpy students out with no one to support that. So that experience of being able to race in really rugged conditions for 24 hours and come out on top because of that life experience was pretty affirming. So that had been the most recent kind of life victory. Prior to that, fast forward or rewind about 6 months to April, here in Arizona, southern Arizona. This is the Arizona Trail 300 race. Many of you are familiar with it. It is essentially your backyard ultra-endurance race. But for those who are not familiar, this is a self-supported ultra-endurance, could call it bikepacking race. And this style of racing is really my passion, more so than the 24s. And that is because you start with a small, generally-ish group of somewhat like-minded people who are set on trying to pedal their bike across a length of Arizona, or whatever that ultra may be, with all that they need, and the only ability for support can come from the services that exist in day-to-day life. So the Sonoida store, for example. But, if my friend Alec here were to be like, oh, Kate's racing the AZT, I'm going to go give her ice cream, that wouldn't be cool, because he's not giving everyone ice cream at any time of the year. So we're riding self-supported, and there's no stop to the clock until you reach the finish line. Because of the nature of the size of the field and the distance that you end up racing, you end up riding by yourself for the majority of these races as well, which is a really interesting experience in that you have to find a lot of your motivation to be intrinsic rather than an extrinsic motivator of having someone to chase. Because that's more just has to be in your head. And so in this scenario, the Arizona Trail race, the Arizona Trail 300 in 2018, I had set out and managed to ride in 51 and a half hours, which took 11 hours off the women's record, and finished the 4th fastest time by anyone ever. With these 3 gentlemen being the only, and still to this day, the only people who have pedaled faster.
Who's that bullshit?
So, right there, and this is actually the men's AZT 300 podium of 2014. In the middle of the top step is Kurt Ressnider, when he set the current record of 45 hours. Over on the left, on the second place podium, is Aaron Gully, who had finished in exactly 48 hours on the dot. I was there to witness, that it was not a minute slower. And then over on the right is Neil Belchenko, and it's actually younger rendition of the current Neil. That was one of his first kind of breaking rides for him. And I think he was like 50 hours or something like that. And in that race that I finished here, I had caught, Neil had been leading the race and I caught him, and there was an hour where I was winning the ABT, and I was so excited because I was a woman beating all of the men out there. But my hub, that Industry 9 sound that you all may know, that I coasted by Neil and it woke him up. And he also rides for Industry 9, so that's okay. But we got to ride together for a while, and although he ultimately ended up riding off as I sat on the ground in Summerhaven, I finished 2 hours behind him, and I was really, and still, despite these other experiences, the highlight of my race career ever, I think, because of, one, how close I was, and I saw the possibility, because in a race that long, 2 hours is really not that much. And I learned a lot as well, and for me mentally, to have things not go quite perfectly and to have made some mistakes but not have given up, and to have finished really happily and strongly was pretty major. And I just want to share that two people here I got to see when they're riding out in the last hour of that race, and the joy of seeing them was huge. So that was April. So at this point, in rewinding that year, we'd had 24-hour world championships and then this record on the Arizona Trail. And prior to that, just 6 weeks before that, was setting a new course record at 24 hours of Old Pueblo, also your backyard endurance race, where I rode 18 laps and 300 miles in 24 hours. Fully supported. Thank you. And so, through these experiences, while having these victories is pretty huge, what I've really learned in the last year, the things that I've taken away from those 3 results specifically, is the ability to take experiences that are actually pretty challenging and uncomfortable. Like, I would be lying to myself and everyone if I said that you're physically comfortable the entire time you're pushing your body as hard as you can for 24 or 48 hours. It's actually pretty uncomfortable. And real things like saddle sores and stomach aches and hands going numb and, all the other wonderful things that come with a fatigued body can very easily translate into not having fun, feeling negative, doubting yourself, just all the negative headspaces that could result in, 1, not as strong of an outcome, and 2, just not having a good time. And if you're really ultimately not having a good time, why are we doing this? And so these experiences of, despite choosing to go into a place that is challenging and uncomfortable, I learned to transform that into an experience that, among the struggle and discomfort, I was really happy. And because, 1, I chose to do all of these things. No one has ever told me that I have to race my bike. And I feel really lucky that I still, and now as a sponsored athlete, I still have complete autonomy over what I do on my bicycle and what inspires me to do it. And I feel lucky that my parents and my coach and my partner and the whole village of people who support me really give me the space to find the inspiration to pursue riding my bike in the ways that I do. And so learning and realizing that I choose to do these things, and that even among the challenges and the struggles, there are things to still be, there are coexisting moments that are really positive, and that may be what we're looking at. I mean, you all have, I'm presuming, have stepped outside of Tucson onto some of the trails around here, or hiked into some of the wilderness areas around here, and it's an incredible landscape. And even if your hands hurt, you can still look up and look around and be like, oh wow, yes, my hands hurt, that is real. And those cactus are amazing. Which when I first started racing, the first year I ever raced the Arizona Trail 300 in 2015, are you all familiar with the creosote bush?
Yeah.
It's probably your most common bush here. And when it rains here, it smells amazing. It's like the desert smell. And I had that connection to the Sonoran Desert prior to racing my Arizona Trail. And I found myself out north of Mount Lemmon completely by myself for over 24 hours, just on creosote. And finally, I decided that every time I saw a creosote, and this probably speaks to where your head ends up going, but I would yell, "Mario Trinitata," which is its Latin name. And that was just a source of joy. And now, well, actually, I might circle back to that. But so yes, the point of that is that at the end of 2018, although there had been these incredible successes that you could put on paper and show great pictures of, ultimately the major takeaway was this huge growth within myself of being able to have these simultaneous experiences of challenge and discomfort, happy and positive, and believing in myself. And so following that day skiing, I went to New Hampshire where my family lives, and I got to go out and walk around in the woods with my nephew. He's 5, and his name is Tyson. It was really fun. And I came back to Idaho where I was planning on spending the winter, ready to start training. I found 2.8 studded tires, and I did not yet own a fat bike, and I was excited and really motivated by that last year to set big goals for 2019. And I also had done the thing that people of, I think, my generation are somewhat willing to do. Of I drained my bank account in order to pursue my dreams of racing my bike that year. And I was about to launch into about 3 months of nonstop work for Knowles, coaching the Arizona Devo team, and Prescott College in order to rebuild that bank account so that then I could spend the summer racing my bike again. And that was my plan. And that seemed like it had worked in the past, and it seems flawless. And so on December 24th, 2018, I went on my first fat bike ride ever. A friend of mine, she's like, "You're here for the winter? And you've never gone fat biking? You need to try this." And she has 2. And so she took me out to Grand Targhee, and we went and rode some of their groomed fat bike single track, which is a really big thing there. And we had a great time. And that day, it had been snowing a lot, and my plan for the rest of the day after we had gone fat biking was to go down and go to the grocery store, which is probably a horrible idea on Christmas Eve because everyone's there. But nonetheless, I was going to a potluck to have a Christmas Eve potluck with other friends who were in the valley and had, for their own work reasons, weren't able to go visit family or didn't have other plans. And I was tasked with purchasing ice cream, ingredients for hot toddies, and because I was about to work a backcountry skiing course that was 2 weeks long, I was buying ingredients for coconut macaroons, which involves coconut and sweetened condensed milk. It's a great source of fuel for when you're living in the snow, because it's a lot of fat and sugar. And so I got those things, and then I pulled out, while I was in the parking lot, I shifted my Toyota Tacoma out of four-wheel drive because the roads were black and wet, not icy, my assessment. And my partner called from Mississippi where he was visiting his family and put him on speakerphone and had the phone on my lap. And I started driving south to Victor where this potluck was. And as I was driving along, talking on a dead flat, dead straight road without steering or shifting or braking or accelerating, I lost the rear end of my truck. And that was the outcome of it. So I fishtailed across the road, and as I was fishtailing, the automatic correction of the fishtail, which was the first thing my dad had me learn to do when learning to drive in the Northeast, was like starting to bring the fishtail back, although honestly completely out of control. But it was moving the car back into my lane rather than in the other traffic lane. And the oncoming car had seen me swerve into their lane, so they had swerved into my lane. And so what was happening was that they were in my lane and I was spinning out of control back across my lane, and they T-boned me at 55 miles an hour with their front right headlight right in my door, and their front left headlight right on my front left wheel, which you can see took an impact. So I spun. I watched the car. For some reason, I kept my eyes open right until it hit, and so I watched the car hit me, and then I closed my eyes, and amazingly, I never lost consciousness, and I was conscious for the whole thing. And when the car came to a stop, I found myself with a choice. And this all happened, what I'm about to describe happened in a split second, but I found myself with a choice. And the choice was to either, the car came to a stop. I knew that I hadn't lost consciousness, but I could not feel my lower body. And when I realized that, I was faced with a choice. And that choice was to, one, freak out because I couldn't feel my lower body, and that often is associated with being paralyzed. Or two, I could remain calm and implement the meditation strategies that my sports psychologist has helped me learn for racing my bike, so that you don't freak out when you lose control of a situation in a bike race. And I think now, having reviewed everything that was great in 2018, one of the proudest moments of my life is choosing that option to remain calm and meditative and not freak out. And instead, still in this split-second moment, a flash of experiences rushed through my head that looked something like this. And in that split-second mental slideshow, I realized and I decided that if I could never walk or bike again, that would be okay, because at 31 years old, I had done a lot of that. And that I was so, so lucky, because all of those experiences, from leading groups of amazing people in the backcountry wilderness of the Western US in all different environments, to bikepacking around the world, to getting to a point where I was racing my bike with the top of the men in ultra endurance races, that those experiences had made who I was sitting there in that truck, and that life would be fine, regardless of what I could or could not do moving forward. However, that at the same time, it's in those experiences that I know that I have been my best and had the most positive impact on the world. And if I do get to walk and bike again, that I will most definitely make sure that I continue to show up as my best and try as hard as I can to make sure that other people have those experiences that I've had, not because they're beautiful, but because they really do inspire an incredible amount of personal growth and connection to other people and the earth. And so there I was, sitting in the truck without feeling my legs. And there's one ambulance in the Teton Valley, and the car that had hit me had 4 people in it, and one of them, the driver, I believe, had briefly lost consciousness. And so, as they should, the emergency medical responders worked on getting the people out of that vehicle first and into the ambulance and taken to the Drix Hospital. Meanwhile, and just so you all know, while I've never met those people, I have heard that they all recovered quickly, and one person had a concussion that they were monitored in a hospital for a few days, and then they recovered from there. But meanwhile, my truck was crunched enough that they couldn't open a door and get to me. And the other thing that had happened, that once I made that decision about like, okay, so I'm not freaking out, I can't feel my legs, it'll be okay. I opened my eyes and I looked to the left. The first people I saw were two of my students from Prescott College from years ago who did not live in the Teton Valley and had no idea that it was me because it was a different truck. And they're wilderness first responders, and they just, out of the amazingness of their souls, had watched this car accident happen in front of them, and they just got out and went for it. And then they went, holy shit, it's Kait. And so one of them went to the Jeep, and the other one went to me, and Julie with me. She ended up being incredible for my emotional state, and also for just being there holding my spine through the broken window of my truck until the firefighter got there. And then I believe she was responsible then for contacting my folks and whatnot. But so I ended up being stuck in my truck for 2.5 hours. It, as you can see, started snowing again, and not knowing what was really going on. And eventually they removed me from the vehicle and onto a backboard of some sort and into the ambulance. I went to the Driggs Hospital just to very quickly be assessed as to have had a quadruple fractured pelvis. So if you were to picture a ring and you break it in 2 places, then there's 4 fractures, and so I had that. I also had broken my sacrum on the left side and my left fibula, and I had ruptured my bladder. And because of the ruptured bladder and the pelvis, they were not equipped to take care of me at that hospital. And because of the snowstorm, I could not get in a helicopter. So I got to ride in an ambulance with the same firefighter and paramedic to the Idaho Falls Trauma 2 Medical Center. And 1 in the morning, I had emergency bladder surgery by a urologist named Dr. Bladder. And I'm not kidding. His name is spelled slightly different than how you'd spell the organ, but the way it's pronounced is Bladder. And also Dr. Smith, the trauma surgeon. And what they discovered to their delight was, despite the contrast and the CT scan, they actually didn't have to do surgery on the bladder, but they did cut my stomach from here to here. And they physically pulled out every single one of my organs and checked it. Not many people can say they've had their organs held. So I woke up on Christmas Day in the ICU looking like this. And a friend in Driggs had come over there to just be with me and support me through that. And then within a few hours, my dear friend, my best friend, Kurt Refsnyder, arrived from Prescott. And he had used his ultra-endurance bike racing experience to drive overnight on Christmas Eve, straight through the night, through Utah, which he said was dead quiet, to the hospital to make sure that I wasn't alone. Within a couple hours, my parents arrived from New Hampshire, and my partner Will arrived from Tennessee. And then I got to meet the surgeon, Dr. Lance Armstrong, the orthopedic surgeon, who drew this wonderful picture. And for the first time up until that point, I learned that I would have a full recovery, an opportunity for a full recovery. And at that point, I knew I wasn't paralyzed, but I knew the extent of my injuries, but I didn't know what that would mean. And so this was the first time that I learned that not only would I be able to walk again, and not only would I be able to pedal a bike inside again, I would have the opportunity to do everything I ever wanted to do again. And that was an incredible source of inspiration that probably got me through the next few months that I'll describe. The first 4 days that I was in the hospital, I laid on my back without moving at all. And I don't know if anyone here has had that unfortunate experience of living in that state, but I think it's, for all people, it is uncomfortable, and especially uncomfortable mentally when you're used to using your body so much. But in that time, I developed bed sores and just that feeling of like there not being any air underneath your back, because a broken pelvis is just moving it at all is a level of excruciating that there aren't that many words for. But during this time, maybe 2 days into it, my mom, sitting there, as families do when someone is trapped in a bed, they sit with you, which is incredible. But she noticed that my hair was covered in sweetened condensed milk and ice cream, and then feathers. And it had been like that since the sweetened condensed milk and the feathers had exploded on my hair. And so she brushed my hair and made a new ponytail and took a picture, which I clearly look thrilled about. Or am just on all the pelvis killing drugs. It's a lot specifically. The other kind of entertaining thing about the feathers was that night on Christmas Eve, when I went into the first surgery for the bladder, the last memory I have before anesthesia kicked in was I got rolled into this white sterile room, just like on my back, staring straight up. And I'm still on top of the down jacket, and the feathers are just floating around. And I hear Dr. Bladder's voice, who I'd not met yet. I didn't unfortunately know if that was his name, otherwise I thought that was hilarious. But I hear him go, "What is this? This has to stop." And then there's just these hands coming across my face, grasping feathers out of me. And then I went out, I woke up in the ICU. It was hilarious. But so on the 5th-ish day, I got my pelvis stabilized with an external fixator, which apparently not many people have had the pleasure of experiencing in real life. And that is a device that is carbon and something else that sticks out of your pelvis and then crosses as a way of just cinching your pelvic ring together. And that is in place of plates. It reduces the risk of bone infection and ultimately makes it so that once the pelvis is healed, you don't have internal hardware. But the catch is that you wear that for 10 weeks. It does not come out. And it is essentially stabilizing your pelvis. So if any twist to the pelvis, there's this leverage thing. And so what that means is that you are completely bound to being on your back or sitting or standing. Well, not standing in my case, but you cannot lay on your side or your stomach. And the reality of having an external fixator was a little intimidating for me. And to take us back to the hot toddies, Kurt, with Will, they went and I emptied out my truck of all my stuff before I went to the wrecking yard to salvage anything they could. And the only thing they could salvage was the bumper, which for some reason they decided was valuable. But they also found lemons for the hot toddies, the whiskey that had been completely uninjured, and then I had a bike in there from the fat biking and some skis. So Kurt went home and made some lemonade. Because when he brought it to the hospital, he put it, well, this is a lot of lemons, but you can turn it into lemonade. And so I drank that. And at that point, I was pretty tired of the hospital, and so I made it my mission to get out of there as soon as possible with my external fixator and get on with healing. And so within 24 hours of that surgery, I sat up out of bed for the first time since the car accident and started to learn to use the wheelchair. And so, although Will learned first, took on wheelies. But I was tasked with a couple of criteria in order to get discharged. I had to, one, be able to breathe without oxygen, which at first was like, oh, that's no problem. I have great lungs. And then it actually proved to be really hard once you've been on such really strong drugs for such a long time with oxygen. So I had to retrain my lungs. I had to get dressed, which actually felt really good. And I had to learn to use the wheelchair, which I tackled. And with that comes with demonstrating, having the physical ability and upper body strength to transfer yourself from the bed to the wheelchair. Because the whole catch with the pelvis and the sacrum, which they had put screws in, is that I was completely non-weight bearing. And I had an order to not put any weight on my legs except for like a 10% in order to pivot off my right leg for 6 weeks. I also got a wonderful catheter that you can see there, which was their strategy for healing my bladder, which according to Dr. Blatter was a miracle solution. And so I got discharged from the hospital on January 2nd, and as you can see, everyone's pretty happy, but I think that, and maybe this just takes my eyes of really knowing my mom and Will, but they are exhausted. And Will has been sleeping in a chair next to me every single night for 9 nights. And my mom has gone back and forth from a hotel, bringing coffee. So we're in Idaho Falls, which is a very Mormon area, and there's no coffee to be found at the hospital, and so she would bring us coffee every day. And I think that while I was too absorbed in my process to really see it then, I know that I've since and through the following months of recovery, the amount of energy and effort that goes into taking care of someone that is in the state that I was in is unreal. And I know moving forward, if I ever find myself around someone who needs that, I will have a huge appreciation for what it takes. Meanwhile, speaking of lemons turned into lemonade, Kurt, who had found himself in Idaho to help at first, then found himself with an opportunity to take on his own adventure of racing JP's Fat Pursuit, an ultra-endurance fat bike race where he and Neil Belchenko raced each other and to a sprint finish. And Kurt ended up winning and having an opportunity that automatically entered him into this year's Iditarod Trail Invitational Race, which is his primary goal for 2020. And so in a kind of cool and bizarre way, him ending up in Idaho and then ending up in the Teton Valley and then ending up having a loaner fat bike, and now he's on this whole other trajectory of racing this year. So I was really, really happy and relieved that something positive came from him. Meanwhile, this is what my life transitioned to. The first step was finding somewhere to live that was wheelchair accessible, and mine and Noel's boss, her friend, has a second home in Idaho who rented it out to us for the month. So that was really nice. It was first floor and comfortable. And the great thing about the leather couch in this case is that you don't have to, if you can't move your legs, you can slide really easily. So that was great. But this is really, I think, when that whole idea of being uncomfortable, at this point I was never in pain. I think like once you break your pelvis, what is painful changes. And so I never felt like I was in pain. I was just never comfortable at all. And that provided the opportunity to find joy in something that didn't involve using my body. And I also couldn't really do that much, and while I didn't have a head injury, I learned that the energy that it takes your prefrontal cortex to recover your body is so big that the symptoms, your head symptoms in the initial phases of recovering from injuries like that is similar to traumatic brain injuries, and that you just don't have energy. And so it was so kind. I got all these puzzles and books and games sent to me for things to do, but really I didn't have the energy for it. I literally was laid on the couch and had these open wounds that Will cleaned every single day. So with the external fixator comes an open wound and a risk of infection for 10 weeks. And he likes to joke that I was the cleanest I've ever been because I had to shower every day, which I adamantly battled to make every other day. Mostly because the transfer from the wheelchair to the shower was really challenging and kind of scary because it was slippery, and also because transitioning so rapidly from a very strong physical female to being a bag of skin and atrophy and having a really crazy scar and this really barbaric thing sticking out of my hips. Like, I did not want to see myself naked when I had to shower. And so I hated the shower. So I fought it. But waking up and drinking coffee every morning with Will and my mom, that was amazing. And that was really, I think, what made the rest of the day that looked like this pretty manageable, because I knew, hey, I get to wake up and have coffee, and I get to do that again tomorrow. Oh, and with the I figured that these were essentially my new handlebars. Instead of having a life behind handlebars, I had life behind these. And so just like my handlebars, where I put little mantras to remind myself of what I'm striving for on my bike, I did that for my external fixator, which is a lot of patience, a possibility to live into. I'm Kate. And we added a couple later on. And while no one, Will or my mom, weren't all that keen to throw a camera in my face when I was having a meltdown, there are the occasional photos of the less happy, positive times. And I think I just need to share it because I shared my story a lot on Instagram, and people found, I'm often actually asked how I ended up being so positive through it, and that was really impactful. And I was, but it's just like everything else that we live through is like, this is a roller coaster experience. And so because the challenge was so great, the kind of like highs of learning that you're gonna get to walk again, learning you're gonna get to bike again, those little mini steps toward that process, like getting out of the hospital and into the wheelchair, or the first time that I can figure out how to lean forward and fill up a cup. Like, there are these little mini victories that we can celebrate, but there are also the really low, bad times of like, wow, I'm on a blood thinner and I get these crazy nosebleeds all the time. And for some reason, that's what makes me have a meltdown and end up pitying myself. But then that experience of, I think, living that, kind of those bouts of depression and sadness are also what brings us back to that place of being really happy and joyful. Speaking of happy and joyful, this time, I was in Idaho. I could not leave Idaho because I couldn't travel, and I had all these follow-ups with all these surgeons, and so I suddenly found myself just living there, and with Will and my mom, and it was winter there, and it was snowing every single day. And so while it was very meditative to just sit inside and watch it snow, at the same time, I couldn't go out in a wheelchair and like get wheeled around, because in the occasional time we tried to go on a wheelchair field trip around the driveway, it would be fun for a second, and then I was like, wow, we're bouncing through snow, and I'm like these pin sights are jarring, and my skin is moving up and down against these pins, and it would just be uncomfortable. And after a few minutes, I was like, wow, it feels amazing to be in the sun and in the fresh air, and I can't believe that it's been however many weeks that I've done this, and that's just not a reality for me at this point. And so I think that time, but certainly the longest time I've spent without going outdoors, ended up being like such that classic example of you don't really know what you have until you lose it. And in my recovery process, as far as PT went, on one of my follow-ups with my surgeon, I asked him if I could get on a stationary bike. And he looked at me and he said, well, I don't know of anyone who ever has with an X-Fix, but if you can tolerate sitting on your saddle with a broken pelvis, that would be fine for it. And if you can actually get your legs around in the motion where your thighs don't hit the X-Fix and inhibit you from pedaling, then you can do that. And I said, great, I'll see you in a few weeks.
What month was this, guy? What month was this?
This was 3 weeks after being in the accident. This was like January 28th.
Wow.
And so that first day, that is actually this picture, was the best ride of my life. I was back on my bike in an X-Fix, and I pedaled for 5 minutes until I was tired, And I use a power meter, which just happened to be on my bike. If it means anything to anyone, I pedaled at 10 watts.
It's about the friction of the chain.
Pretty much. And I worked my way, and from that point on, and the rule is use pain as your guide. And my physical therapist, who was amazing and really progressive and very encouraging of doing this, just had these increments, and she's like, and if you get sore, then we stop. And so there were a couple bits of stopping and waiting, and the main thing is that to have pins sticking into here, your hip flexors get pushed over. And so my hip flexors were slightly not in the right place for all this time, and that made pedaling initially a little uncomfortable. But I think when I look back on it and people ask how my physical recovery has been so fast as far as getting back on the bike, I think that doing this, although it wasn't a true workout, just being able to move my legs in a way that you otherwise would, there's no way that you could when you're in a wheelchair, was huge for my recovery, because I got blood moving and I was able to just sit in a different position, and while I don't know that my heart necessarily went that much up, it went up more than just sitting there. And nothing to back this up, I really believe that made a huge difference. And it blew my surgeon away. I showed him the video and he was like, "You did what?" It was good for him too. And otherwise, the days looked like pedaling, sitting and working on my PT, which was mostly initially just like working on activating my muscles and trying to move my legs a little bit. And that started off with just doing this. And that was really hard. And then doing this. And this is in a lying position, and that was really hard. And taking care of me continued to be exhausting. This slide, I think this is actually a picture that happens when you just move your phone and it takes a picture. But I think it actually is a good talking point for a kind of entertaining story. And that is that when the catheter got taken out, once my bladder had healed, I had a new thing to learn, and that was how to pee again. The great thing about having a catheter and a broken pelvis is that every time, with the wheelchair, every time you have to go to the bathroom, you have to transfer. And so with the catheter, I didn't have to transfer to the toilet every time I had to pee, which reduced the amount of transfers I had to do in those first 3 weeks, which is huge. Once the catheter came out, I found myself having to transfer regularly, and because my bladder was still... Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Because my bladder was still healing, I wasn't allowed to just wait to pee. I couldn't have a full bladder. I had to just get up and go, which meant having to get up in the middle of the night. So what became the norm and explains this picture is that at 2 in the morning, I'd wake up and I'd have to pee. And because the bed wasn't a leather couch, I couldn't slide myself out of the bed, so I'd wake up Will. He'd get up, walk around, lift my legs around, and then I could sit up, usually with help, because my abs had atrophied as well. And then I'd transfer onto the wheelchair. And then he would move the walker to the toilet, and I'd wheel myself to the toilet, and I'd transfer onto the toilet. And then I would pee. And, there we go. And then I would transfer back into the wheelchair. He would have fallen asleep in this time. I'd go and I'd wake him up. He'd go get the walker, bring it back to the bed. I'd work on transferring back onto the bed. And in the meantime, it was Will's opportunity to pee, which I'd hear, "Kate, you peed on the floor again." And that was the reality of Kate in a wheelchair. And so that's that story. The amazing thing, I think, about one of the really hard and amazing things about this was that if we were to think back to that but very ambitious and idealistic idea of being able to just go earn all my money in 2 months, but then I'd get in a car accident, and am relying on healthcare that is basically in a catastrophic type plan, and am not necessarily in a financial place to be pursuing the best recovery that I could have, Kurt had set up a GoFundMe that an overwhelming amount of people supported and brought in, like, tripled what I had projected as the bare minimum to make sure that I could pay the necessary bills. And that made it so that I could actually get the care that I needed and have the space, both like somewhere to live and cover the bills, and then also take the time through the following months to really get through this. And one of those, a lesson that I learned tied to that is that idea of asking for help, and that you can be both strong and a leader, and also need help and ask for it and accept it. And so that's something that I often found myself thinking about whilst having this view. Amazingly, 6 weeks passed, and I got to transition onto freedom sticks. And while I am walking outside in this picture, I probably would have made a lot of people nervous doing that because I'm on snow and I don't have the crampons for crutches, which they actually make. And so I was still really confined to staying inside because it just continued to snow. But with that came the freedom of a lot more physical therapy. Now I could use my right leg. I was still not weight bearing on my left leg because of the sacrum, which is slower to heal than your pelvis. And I was still in the X-Fix, but I was able to start to do things like bridges, and I could pedal more, and I could start to do all these standing exercises on the one leg. And so my mom, who had been living with me, and Will, who she had never met until in the airport on Christmas Day, she saw me onto crutches, and at that point, the frozen meals that she had prepared and left in the freezer for my dad had run out. And so she went home, and having her there for those 7 weeks was really incredible. I realized that we don't actually spend that much time together, haven't spent that much time together since high school. So PDT continued, and now I had just 4 weeks left in the X-Fix. And while it was exciting to have new things to do, it also just, that motivation that came with it initially started to wear. And it was really interesting because as I got more and more able-bodied, I think that my motivation and energy just got lower and lower and lower and lower. And so I added the I get to mantra, because it really started to take that, although I spent still my days laying on my back and sitting on my butt, and some 1 hour a day, I worked up to an hour, pedaling on my trainer in a garage, that I still got to heal. And that I was so lucky for that. The next image is graphic, but it's real. Meanwhile, the pin site was healing as well, in the sense that the skin was trying to heal around the pins. And that's called hypergranulation, and it's really freaky. But that's a very real thing, apparently, and the surgeon was not at all surprised to see it, but I was horrified by it, and that took a lot of managing as well. And I think that just those things of starting to feel worn down resulted in looking like this more than maybe easy to share, but that really did come from, I think, just that place of exhaustion of just having tried. At that point, it felt like for so long to just get through the X-Fix. And so it was really like the last week in the X-Fix, while it could be seen as such a celebratory time, it wasn't until I was literally walking into the hospital to get it taken out that it felt like I was being lifted of that burden. And so it came out. I got really bizarre bandages put on me for those pin sites, which had to heal, but actually healed really quickly. And now, that's what I look like inside. And so that's with a healed pelvis and 2 surprisingly large screws in my sacrum. We went home, and there's that whiskey bottle complete with a feather had to make a toast to. And my surgeon, who had done an incredible job of just being really methodical, is also quite young. And I think that for me, it was really cool to see him have a patient like myself that was ready to just go for it and try as hard as I could, and to have the results that he said, well, they're possible, and for him, they're actually happening as well. And in this photo, he had just cleared me to get off of the crutches. So following the X-Fix coming out, I weaned off the crutches for a week onto a cane, and I went for my first walk outside. And at that point, that was March 21st. And it was 3 months, an entire season of not going out in the outdoors. And that's in Teton Canyon. That's the Grand Teton to the left of my head. And I didn't go very far, and it was amazing. But then, even better than that, because I love bikes, I got to go on my first ride outdoors 3 days later in a very controlled setting, which I chose to interpret as a quiet farm road. And I said first in January that the best ride of my life was that one in the X-Fix with my trainer. Well, now this was that. And I don't think I could be as happy as I am in that picture. Following that, I had this whole new surge of motivation, and so I went straight to the sport-specific or endurance sport-specific strength coach in town and started working on transitioning back into regaining the strength and fitness I'd lost through a remote coaching program, integrated the pool, and was able to, within a few weeks, start riding my bike on dirt outside. And I came back down to Arizona to spend the rest of the spring down here. And it's interesting for me to look back on this time because it was as if I was unleashed from jail. I just went for it. Like everything I could do, I did. And it was as if I had the mentality that I had to make up for this lost time. And while it had some positive outcomes, I think it also was maybe not the wisest approach, because despite my body being ready and capable to progress at this rate, my headspace and had to continue to motivate and continue to just persevere and be in this place that was really like the same headspace that you're in during an ultra-endurance mountain bike race. And so I was just living in this space for the months of recovery. And I started training again and got to ride with Kurt, got to go ride in some fun places like Moab and go just have fun with people I love. Continued doing the PT that I think at this point is easy for people to slip out of doing, but just had the people in the physical therapists and the coaches just be like, you have to keep doing this, you have to keep doing this. And then I decided that for me, the true marker of a full recovery would be people to go bikepacking, because that is one of my favorite ways to experience life. I get to ride my bike, I get to sleep on the ground outside, I'm often with people I love, you see places at a pace that is digestible, you can do this in all around the world in landscapes and cultures that you're unfamiliar with, and the whole experience is a way to integrate into that and experience it. Or in this case, you can go bikepacking from home. And so Kurt, being the continued friend and supporter, agreed to go bikepacking with me as an experiment. And we said we'd ride for maybe just one night, and if it didn't go well, I'd just turn around and ride home. Or we'd go for up to 6 days. And amazingly, after I discovered that as long as I just kept doing clamshells and the glute activation exercises, that I was totally fine pedaling a heavy bike. Excuse me. And so we rode a route that we designed around central Arizona that went south from Prescott to Crown King, down across the Agua Fria, into the Verde, off the Verde Rim to Childs, and that's the Verde River crossing, and then up to Pine, Arizona. We chose to push our bikes up the Arizona Trail instead of the highway, and then rode the Wild West route north to Flagstaff, and then across to, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name of it, the Kasner Mountain Butte, and dropped down into Sedona and across Nova Maze Mountain and back to Prescott. It ended up being 6 days and 300 miles, and my body just continued to show up for what we were doing. It snowed. I don't know if anyone remembers the snowstorm in May, but that's when we were out. And being able to just live on my bike and have sleeping on the ground and having fires and cooking meals and getting tired and pedaling for the amount of time where you just kind of stop talking to the person you're riding and you naturally split apart and end up in your own head and notice things that, although it's a landscape you know really well, you learn more about it. It was all so soul-filling, and I think it was the first experience I'd had in the entire year that was actually like adding a lot to my cup. And from there, I went back to Idaho for another follow-up, and I got the "you are cleared with no restrictions" announcement from my surgeon, which was thrilling, really, because up to that point it'd been, well, you can ride as much as you want, but you can't crash, or you shouldn't really run too much at this point because your pelvis, it's really jarring on your pelvis, and there are all these other restrictions. And so it was interesting because I anticipated that to be such a milestone of, and now I'm free. But what instead resulted was a then actual kind of mental and emotional crash of feeling like I had just crossed the finish line. And it had a very similar mental and emotional feeling of finishing an ultra where you cross the finish line and then all that energy that you had for getting there was gone because you knew that you'd made it, and you sit in the chair and you can't get up again. And for me, with an ultra, like a 24-hour race or 48-hour race, something like that, that amount of time racing would require at least 3 to 4 weeks of really solid recovery to get through to when I'm energetic and ready to go again. And in this case, this ultra had been from December until June. And so this was a challenge that I had not expected in any way, and what it was resulted in was just feeling so worn out and so tired. And I don't know, I know a lot of people can relate to this, but that place of feeling so tired and so worn out, and then also having had all this trauma that I had just been working through getting away from, ultimately led to just feeling fairly depressed often this summer, which then turned into feeling really anxious. And it's really crazy how those things go like this. But again, and at this point I could work more. I was coaching for the Arizona Devo team and working for Bikepacking Roots some, and I was able to lead a backpacking NOLS course for girls from Texas. And so I was working some more, but I also still had the resources to just take the time to let my entire being kind of catch up and be okay with the year. And for me, that's being around water, camping, going and riding my bikes and then getting off them, and sitting and looking at things like flowers and mountains. For some reason, I love pedaling shuttles, and so pedaling a shuttle so that Will could fish. Going places where you find things like wolf tracks. Finding more flowers. And then as my body was getting stronger, I just started moving in the mountains as much as I could, and as much as my schedule allowed, but as I could handle. And this is on a section of the Continental Divide Trail on the border between Idaho and Montana. It's the Lion's Head area, and it's interesting because it's a wilderness study area that actually allows bicycles, and it's one of the most wild places that I've ever been allowed to ride my bike. And I ended up, it's just an hour-and-a-half drive from Driggs, and I ended up going back there really regularly because that feeling, like knowing that I was riding among grizzly bears and wolves and places where I could go and pedal up on that climb, there's over 54 switchbacks to get up 6,000 feet. And just that process of pedaling and focusing on each and every turn and climbing through the different forest types up and into the alpine was really incredibly cathartic for me. And chasing sunsets and riding with friends, and ultimately the joy that is enabled by moving and using my body that was now so able in the mountains with the people I love, and still having to practice patience with myself for the things that I couldn't do, proved to be incredibly restorative. And while bikes are very important to me, I actually found myself at a point where I was better at biking than walking, and realized that that might stay the case unless I went out and practiced walking. So I did that, because it's important to go walk. And while moving from Arizona and leaving a tighter community of female friends has been hard, I had some opportunities to go move in the mountains and on multi-day trips with a good female friend, and that was such a powerful opportunity to share that with her. I think that we can relate that it's like there are friendships and the connections that we have with close friends that when you share a process and get into a rhythm with them on a multi-day experience, that you come out of it having just grown your friendship, but also had an opportunity to reflect because of that talking that you get to do with them. And so towards the end of the summer, I decided that it was time to put a race number on. And I painted my nails gold, which is what I do before I race my bike. And I raced the Pierce Hole 50K. The year before I raced, they have 3 versions on the same day. There's a 100 mile, a 100K, and a 50K. It's one lap, and it's a lap, a 50K lap that they do either once, twice, or 3 times. And I had been coaching the Idaho NICA team that summer as a way to get out and ride and just be involved with the community, and also try to just share some of my experience. And my goal for this race was to keep up with the boys that I coached. And I was very happy and successful in doing that. I was right smack in the middle of the 5 of them, and I also was second in the women's open, which really surprised me because I hadn't done any intentional training. But when I was at the start line and really unsure of what was going to happen, but figured I had nothing to lose. I knew I could ride that far, and at the very least, I could get myself back to the end by eating and drinking, because ultimately, that will always get you back to the end. And so I just started, and it was as if my body never forgot what it was like to race a bike. And so I just took off, and I was leading the race for 20 miles, and then I blew up, and I ate and drank my way to the finish. I got past, and it was great. And about a month later, I raced a backcountry enduro in the Tetons. It was a local grassroots event to support the trails, and it was a really fun format of racing. And I ended up winning that as well, or not as well, but I ended up winning that, which was, for me, a testament of learning to trust my body again. And at that point, I've crashed once on my bike this summer, and it was very small, minor, just and so to be in a setting where I was pushing myself to descend fast with that risk of a high-speed crash, but to accept it and still ride within my ability, but at that pace, was a pretty big mental hurdle that I got over. And so by the end of this summer, I had gotten through the wheelchair, the hospital, the wheelchair, the X-Fix, the crutches, into learning to walk again, learning to bike again, had gone bike packing, which at that time was my finish line, had the crash that followed in truly 3 or 4 months of just working on finding some sort of normalcy again and getting my feet back under me. And I can confidently say that that time moving in the mountains, just like all of those years prior to the accident, leading to the person I had become, that those experiences had brought me to a place of being really healed. And I was approaching the fall or the autumn, whichever word you prefer for the season, and I had this somewhat lingering back burner commitment that I had made in 2018 to the Karen Project to be an ambassador for them. Because I had reached out to them at the end of last year, having heard about what they were doing and just wanting to be involved and wanting to use the platform I have as an athlete to be able to advocate for increased access for girls and young women to have the experiences that have been so transformative in my life, ideally for girls at a younger age than I had them, and for girls who don't have the sort of privilege that I've had in my life, and the access that came through the family that I was raised in and the educational experiences that I had, but for any and all girls. And so the traditional format for their ambassadors is to do an adventure fundraiser. And initially in 2018, I thought that would be like a big race, maybe one that I set an overall record on, or a big international bikepacking trip. And when I was thinking about and I still wanted to do this through this whole process, but it didn't feel genuine for it to be one of those things, because that wasn't my reality right now. Like, one, I promised myself there would be nothing else ultra in 2019. That was ultra enough. And it felt like my recovery and that experience had the possibility to have an impact that was positive and extended beyond myself and the people I reached through social media. So I decided that in order to dovetail off the 84 days that I was stuck inside in the X-Fix, I would do an 84 days outside campaign as a tribute to my recovery, as an opportunity to continue to have a year that is honoring that process and isn't taking on anything too big, but also as a way of showing people that, one, multi-day wilderness backcountry trips are incredible and something that I want everyone, regardless of their gender, to experience. Also, the days that we create even a half an hour to step outside of our normal day-to-day grind to make the space, especially on days that we need it because we're stressed or anxious or depressed or angry, to get outside, that those mini adventures are also hugely valuable. And so I kicked off this campaign on October 1st, which is plus or minus 84 days from this December 24th, and started off with pedaling the shuttle of a canoe trip. And so it was the biggest bike ride I'd taken on that day, and I rode from the Salmon River on the Wild West route, south, technically, to Stanley, to Chalice, and then joined my friends for the rest of the shuttle for the canoe trip. And we went on a 7-day middle fork of the Salmon River whitewater canoe trip, in which the first day you can see it snowed. And it was a very cold, but really beautiful trip. And that time of year, there aren't that many people on the river. Most of the folks on the river are either scouting for hunting in the wilderness area. It's the largest wilderness area in the lower 48, or they're out for fishing. So it's pretty quiet. And I'd never been there before. Following that, went back to Drake's for a few days, went out on bike rides and walks during the days that I wasn't, that I was transitioning, and then had an opportunity to go bikepacking in Bears Ears as part of a story for Bicycling Magazine, an article that Aaron Gully is writing about Bikepacking Roots, the nonprofit that Kurt and I founded, the Wild West route, and most importantly, the Bears Ears and the National Monuments issues in Utah under the current administration. And so we rode for 5 days through Bears Ears, and this, because this crowd might be interested, this route that we rode will be released this next year in 2020 as the Bears Ears alternate to the Wild West route, which will be a less snowy way to get through Utah, but also afford a 800-ish mile loop through central Utah. Due to some change in life plans following that trip and a week of snow in Idaho, which days mostly looked like running and riding on gravel roads, I went home to New Hampshire to see my family, and this was the first time I saw my brother since my accident. We got to ride bikes. He knows how to mountain bike and has decided, for whatever reason, recently that he's now obsessed with it. And so he demoed a Mach 5.5 and we went out and rode in the Kingdom Trails in Vermont. I got to climb a peak nearby with my parents, which I know is hugely meaningful for them. They love hiking, and they had not seen me able like that. And so I think that while, for me, and that was a good reminder, and continuing to see people in these sporadic bits has been a good reminder of really how much happens in such a short amount of time, and also what can be lost. My nephew, I got to go walk with him some more. He's now 6, and far more excited about going, doing more than just like throwing sticks in the outdoors, and he actually really loves to go walk along creeks. And really, while some of those bigger trips and trips with my family and adventures outside of my family were meaningful, I think that in this time, the days that are really quiet and are those days that I wouldn't necessarily be going outside otherwise if I wasn't doing this project, like the days where I have a lot of work to do on the computer, or I'm tired and I've had this like mental lapse back into just feeling really worn out or down about this year, that going and taking the time to just be outside, whether it's for a short walk or for going for a run or finding just like going to a new place that I haven't been to. And I recently, the theme in all of the last, I think we're on 68 days now. The theme in the last 68 days has been snow. And I am now living in Idaho, and I'll be spending the winter mostly there. And I decided that I'm lucky enough to work remotely. I can work from wherever my computer is and can ride. And so I decided to come to Arizona for a little bit of sunshine before really going and settling into December and January in Idaho. And I got down here and it snowed. And then it snowed again. And that's okay. It melts. But Kurt and I went out on the Black Canyon Trail just a few days ago. This was on Tuesday. And we rode and we were talking about next year, which is an ongoing conversation. But what we're talking about are my goals, and specifically how I'm going to break his record on the Arizona Trail 300 in April. And the fact that now, just 2 weeks-ish from a year out from this recovery, that's what I'm planning and working towards, just blows my mind. And then I put the slideshow together like this and I start crying. And I have to go and ride with my best girlfriend to talk about it and process it. And ultimately what it comes down to for me is that while I feel so, so grateful to have had the opportunities that are given to me, both through luck and through all the support that has been just provided and offered for family and friends and all the medical care and all of the people in this community that have reached out, whether they've met me or not, to make it so that I can stand here today, both pursuing my own dreams and my own passions from my bike, but also doing so concurrently with trying to make a future for other opportunities for other women and girls in the outdoors. That is what has brought me here today. It's kind of like a slide to leave it on, but are there any questions?
What's next?
What's next?
What's the most current thing next?
The most current thing next is that I'm going to try to go on a 3-ish day solo bikepacking trip on Monday through Wednesday. I think solo time is actually really cathartic as well, and I haven't taken that much of that this year.
Locally?
Yeah. I'm torn between from like Tucson south on the ACT to Patagonia and back up the Wild West route, or from Picket Post south.
Nice.
Yeah. And then the final little adventure to conclude this 84 days outside is when I was in the hospital. Will said, apparently offhand, don't worry, a year from now we're gonna just be camping, snow camping, and backcountry skiing. And I just latched onto that. It's like, yes, I'm going to do that. And so we're gonna go spend from the 23rd to the 26th, so that the 24th and the 25th have nothing to do with vehicles. Sleeping in a snow cave and skiing. So that's what's next.
Yes, I have a question, Kate. It's me, Isaac.
Yep.
How do we support this CAM project?
Yeah.
Oh.
If this effort or story has inspired you at all to contribute to my fundraiser, please consider donating either cash here, can Venmo me, or PayPal, or write a check to me, and anything that comes through those ways will be totaled and donated through the online CrowdRise as a sum from the Campfire Cycling Story Night. But you can go directly to the site, and your donation will be tax deductible, though maybe not from Australia. And you can do that at any time. And so you can either take a picture of this or write it down, or you can find these links on my Instagram. You can go to just the Karen Project website, which is really straightforward, and navigate to it through there. But those are all ways. Thank you. Yes?
And what Karen Project things are supported that are in Arizona?
Yeah, so in Arizona specifically, I would have to pull up, and I believe that we could, they have a map of which ones, where the different organizations are supported. And I'm blanking on.
The website would have that information.
Yeah, the website has a map, like who we support, and it has the little dots of like, this is who's here.
Great.
Yeah.
You canoed the Verde River yet?
Yeah.
Isn't that awesome?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Beasley all the way?
Beasley down to Childs. Yeah. There's a lot of brush. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Did you grow up doing all of this? I know you said your parents are hikers, but were you always outside doing things? How did they raise you to be like this?
I grew up. How did they raise me to be like this? Very stubbornly. I grew up hiking some, a little bit, and skiing quite a bit. And then I also grew up riding horses and working with horses in like a largely outdoor setting. Like I worked with, and I think that actually had a huge role in it. Yeah.
Are the sacrum screws in for good, and do you have any ongoing sort of discomfort or sort of orientation issues? Or?
Yeah, so the sacrum screws are in there for good, unless something becomes problematic with them, which I think they say with any hardware. And at this point, I think that like every once in a while, like I feel the sensation of the nerve damage like regrowing, and so it'll be like funny tingling and it goes away. I do get some sacrum soreness from, especially once my glutes get tired from long rides, and that's something that's like really intimidating for me about thinking about ultras. It's just, well, how's that gonna play out? But really at this point, and a lot of that can be managed with, that can be easily managed with stretching and activating my glutes. But honestly, when I'm the most uncomfortable is after a really long drive or airplane ride, and I feel like I'm 95, which I've never felt like I was 95 before. And they say that your bones are growing for a year following the accident, so, and that all the connective tissue takes even longer. So I think there's a lot still happening inside. Yes.
AZT race has been pushed out in the year
Yeah.
to 2020. How does that affect your plans?
Well, so I am intending to go time trial the course in April, as I would have, because that works better. One, I don't think I can wait that long. Like, I practiced a lot of patience already. I don't really want to wait until October, but also I am invited back to 24-Hour Worlds, and that is that same week as the AZT in the fall.
Were you going to announce your attempt? I'd like to be at the same spot to get your
Yeah, I will, as soon as I pin down a weekend, I will share it on the Arizona Trail Facebook page. I can let you know. That would be wonderful.
Yes,
44 hours.
Kate, I have another one. It's like that.
Yep.
I think that was an incredibly genuine commentary of your recovery. I think most people here expect nothing less of you, to be honest. But can you maybe go back to a cat photo or a smiling Kate photo, and can you just tell us about the purpose of the CAN project?
Yes.
Just because I missed it. Maybe I have too many beer. I don't know.
Yes, so the Karen Project's mission is to inspire and elevate women in the outdoors by increasing outdoor opportunities and access for young girls and young women, for girls and young women, through outdoor programming. And so what they do is they use women, other women's like myself, and any of you women, if you were to go out and be like, I'm gonna go bikepacking, or I'm gonna go do this race, like, you can create an adventure fundraiser. And by crowdsourcing and generating support for your project, they are making grants that are distributed to nonprofits that are fulfilling that mission. And so they are increasing access and opportunities for girls to go mountain biking, and they are providing opportunities for refugee women to get out in the outdoors, and they're providing opportunities for girls to have after-school climbing programs. And so it is a nationwide organization in that way, or it has a nationwide impact.
Right. I like that photo.
that was funny because the somewhat forced and Kurt's part, because the pictures before that I look the same, and Kurt's eating. Kurt, look happy. He goes, I'm eating. I'm like, well, look happy. Are there any other questions?
Which of the your three big results in 2018 was the most challenging or painful to go through?
Oh yeah. That's a really good question. Challenging or painful?
XO recovery.
Well, I think that I could think of them in two different ways. For challenging, like the Arizona Trail Race was probably the most challenging because that was the one where I had the most things not go quite right. And which is great, like I wouldn't take that back because for my growth as a racer, that was huge to be able to be like, oh, well, that didn't work out, or oh, I just made this mistake, oh, I just made this other mistake, oh. And to still just keep going and keep trying as hard as I could. But that wasn't necessarily painful. And then I think that just like racing in the cold rain was probably the more painful version. It's like, it was so muddy that there was just like mud in my pants. And yeah, I'm like just cold, wet hands, and there's just mud everywhere.
And then my follow-up was, were you as you were recovering from the crash, were you reflecting on that kind of echo, or like that?
Yeah, I think that one of the valuable outcomes of ultra racing and bikepacking, or just doing anything choosing to do anything that's challenging, is that then when you find yourself having to get through something that's challenging that you haven't chosen, you have all the exercised skills of getting through it. And so that definitely enabled the way in which I approached my recovery. That just demanded like a whole nother level of it. And now, speaking of like lemons turned into lemonade, one of the things I'm really excited about racing next year is to see how getting through something like this informs my racing. Because I think, well, I mean, even on a very basic level, like what's painful is really different, and what's long is really different. So that feels like a subtle gift.